Hello guys, it is I, Frieza700. We are back with some Warhammer 40K lore. This time, what the fuck is the Council of Nikaea? Now, first, before we even begin talking about this incident, this topic is going to have a lot of different discussions, a lot of side topics. So if you see the length of the video, that is why it's so long. Because in order for you to fully grasp what the Council of Nikaea is, we got to dive into various subjects. So, first, before we even talk about what the council of it is, let's talk about what is Nykeya. So Nykeya is a primordial world. It's actually really remote in the galaxy. It's really hard to find. It's really just out there and out of the way. This is nice for a lot of reasons. Now, it being a primordial world, it is covered in storms, volcanoes, and oceans. Now, this, of course, means that it's a young world. It barely has an atmosphere. And it, of course, is going to take a lot of work to make it safe for you to be on. As, after all, the only land that exists on this planet would be the volcanoes. There is no islands with tropicals. No. It's just straight up volcanoes and mountainous rocks sticking out of the ocean. Now, this world was hand-selected by the Emperor himself. And he used his powerful fucking psyker mind to make one volcano safe. Now, by safe, I mean he made it where the storm was not really that active in this region. This way you can actually land there, and also he kind of left some rocks floating in the air. Really beautiful scenario, honestly. Now, while the volcano is temporarily safe with his psyker mind, he decided to use his one son, Perturabo, and some Mechanicus boys to go down to the world and do their architecture work. Now, the Mechanicus kind of helped the Emperor a bit, because, mind you, the Emperor is the one who's keeping the storms at bay, he's keeping the volcano lava at bay. So this Mechanicus not only built some devices to breathe an atmosphere into the world and breathe, life into the planet, they also built some shielding technology on it, so that way the volcano itself is safe, which makes it a little easier for the Emperor's mind. But he still had to keep that golden ray beacon, just so that way the storms were having an opening so people could land there. It's very hard to land in the middle of a storm. Now, Perturabo, on the other hand, decided to carve out the inside of the volcano and form it into kind of like a coliseum, made it an arena for combat. This, of course, was not the Emperor's intentions, and Perturabo was very agitated when, yet again, his work was unappreciated and converted into a different use. Now, instead of being an arena, it was used as a massive theater, almost like a massive courtroom, where the Emperor would sit, where a judge would sit for the arena combat. Now, the security of this world was left in care to the Sisters of Silence, the Custodes, some of the Mechanicus, 3 great companies of Space Wolves, and, of course, a small Imperial fleet orbiting above. Now, the sheer power the Emperor showed in keeping the storms at bay produced that massive golden light that, on one hand, it showed how great psykers are, their ability to make beautiful structures and how natural their power can mix with the reality we live in, the known universe. But on the other hand, this kind of overinflated Magnus the Red's ego into thinking that already the Emperor was biased to his position. This, of course, was not the case. The Emperor was very neutral. And Magnus having an ego inflated is not a good fucking thing when you're trying to debate a very delicate matter. So, speaking about the matter, what was the purpose of this council? Well, the council was summoned to debate before the Emperor the situation of psykers. Now, as the Imperium grew, it had less and less outer enemies to face and more inner enemies that were, of course, the psykers. They were starting to become a growing problem. As the Imperium grew and its population rose, more and more of them started to display psyker abilities. This, of course, was not well researched. Not many humans knew what to do about it. And this grew some concern, mostly as superstition. And this is where the anti-psyker position mostly came of, is mostly the superstition. Because some worlds would end up totally enslaved to a band of sorcerers. Other worlds would deal with just demons spilling out and just killing everybody. But at the time, they had no idea what the demons were. So, of course, this helped grow more and more, I would say, ignorance and more superstition. Now, that being said, the Emperor is kind of wary of psykers for this exact reason. This is why he's maintaining a neutral position to hear out both sides. Now, it also should be said, though, that psykers can cause a lot of issues. They're not just innocent beings who have special telekinesis. No. Just one human psyker, like Malkador the Sigilant, could choke out Horus Lupercal, which is this giant demigod, with just a thought, with just a wave of his hand. And this is a very scary notion to people of the Imperium, that one human psyker could be born maybe as gifted as the Emperor and actually cause serious harm to him. So this is, of course, a massive threat that needs to be dealt with. But the issue is how. So that's the main argument for the anti-psyker position. Now, on the pro-psyker side, we see that their main argument is not necessarily that psykers are bad or evil. Instead, they're saying that the use of this power must be expanded on as the aliens that they fight, like the Eldar, use it. So, since they're gifted with a few psykers in their population, they should learn how to use this skill to fight. Now, the only issue is, though, is that people view it as arcane, as forbidden, as evil underhand tactics. But the pro-psyker argument isn't that it's arcane, forbidden, evil, or underhanded, but rather it's a skill, like a sword. It's a skill, like repairing your gun. It's something that anyone can be a psyker and also be a marine. They can fight just as hard as any marine with a bolter or with a sword, as his duty says. But his duty also says he should try to perform exceptionally with all tools at his disposal. This, of course, would be their main argument, that psyker powers is just another tool in his arsenal, that he should learn how to use, learn how to temper, learn how to control. Now, the main argument also wasn't just superstition, but it was also that if you ban psykers, then that would mean two things. One, you're banning knowledge, which is not good, and also you're banning weapons to defend against these external threats and internal. After all, the only way to kill a psyker is usually with another psyker. This, of course, kind of doesn't stand too well against the others, because they have killed sorcerers before without psyker powers. It just took a lot of casualties. The other issue of the debate was about the librarian program that was recently implemented into the Imperium. The main debate was, of course, whether or not that was sorcery. The term sorcery in their vocabulary means to gain power through bargaining with other beings in the warp, or to sacrifice people's souls to perform arcane rituals. This, of course, was mostly a debate targeted at the Thousand Suns, as the Space Wolves personally saw them use sorcery to subdue planets. Now, by subdue planets, I mean literally they would sacrifice a bunch of slaves or human populace to make this massive ritual that would control the minds of everybody on the world. This would subjugate them to the imperial rule, which, of course, doesn't settle well, because now it brings up the topic of, is this right? Is this morally justifiable? We're killing people and literally destroying their souls just to do what exactly? Save us 100 Marines' lives? There's no honor in such of these deeds. And, of course, bargaining with beings that we don't know fully can also have bad consequences, as we've seen only a few of them, like Chaos Spawn, and they've been shown to be very nefarious beings. Of course, at the time, they didn't know to make the connection that Chaos Spawn are those warp beings that they're talking to and making these bargains with. And also, they don't understand that there is a price to pay with these bargains. They just think that, oh, these things are just going to help me out because they benefit from me succeeding. No. They benefit because they love to see souls getting torn apart. So, let's continue on with the Council of Nikaea. What the fuck is it? So now that we have the preface of this situation, now that you understand why this is happening, now you understand how this world came to be that they decided to do this council on, now you understand the purpose of it, there's also one other secondary and more bigger issue that is being debated. Mostly is that this is the Trial of Magnus, as some would call it. Because Magnus is now standing trial for, well, being a sorcerer. This is, of course, against the Emperor's rules and wishes. This, of course, is heresy. This is something that deserves censor. Now, if you are censored, that means that you're stripped of most of your power, most of your military stuff, and it could actually mean destruction upon yourself. This is why this is a very serious issue, because if a Primarch, someone who leads a fraction of the Imperial army and holds much power, able to destroy a whole sector of the Imperium, and he's committing these kind of crimes, these kind of heinous acts, this is something that needs to be stood on trial and see if these are true, if this, well, bargaining is actually happening. This is also to see if these charges are correct, which, as I said, Magnus's ego is kind of inflated right now. So he doesn't fully understand that he is in grave danger depending what the fuck he says. So, speaking about that, let's talk about people who are totally neutral on this position and pretty much remain neutral afterwards. This would be all the custodies. I'm not going to list them all off individually because that's kind of pointless. You got Aemon Taramakian, you got the Constantine Valdor, you got a few of them. You even got Malcador Sigilant, who I kind of consider a custodian because he does sit by the Emperor and he does offer to protect him. And then you got the Emperor himself, who's also staying neutral to this. And then you got Rogel Dorn and Horus Lupercal. This is why you're not seeing their pictures up on here. So let's talk about who's for it and who's against it. Here we go. Now, as far as Primarchs go that were for the Psykers to being used, this would be Jagatai Khan, firstly. Now, he wasn't present for this council, but he was believing that Psykers should moderate the use of power, but were definitely necessary in fighting some threats, as I said, like other sorcerers. Next up on the right, those would be Alfarius and Omegon. Their reasoning is the same as always, as it is, they just like to use whatever power is available. They like to use tricks and deploy it against their foes without them knowing. This, of course, would be Psykers. Then there is, again on the right, Fulgrim. Fulgrim strive to perfection, and of course him being called the Emperor's children kind of made him want to be more and more like the Emperor. So, him and his legion reflected that. Since the Emperor is a Psyker, that means that they should try at least to harness the Psykers, even though oddly enough the Emperor's children didn't have many Psykers at all, which was kind of odd. But anyways, on to the next one, Vulcan. Vulcan believes that all people, no matter who, should use whatever gifts that they have for the good of their fellow man, even if it's kind of arcane and superstitious. Because, well, that's what Vulcan is. He's a true bro at heart. Then you got Robert Gilman. Now, Robert Gilman, actually, this was interesting, is that he's not actually that outspoken. He didn't really say anything during the Council of Nikaea, but he did say further on that he did support it because he personally believes that it's a strategy that can be used to aid the Imperium in war. And after all, in his Codex Astartes, he does list that they are a viable strategy for dealing with various threats, whereas using other ways of dealing with the same threat would just not be as effective. So that I thought was very fascinating, is that he personally viewed it this way, but he just wasn't confident enough to stand there and say it. Because, well, this was about to get messy for anyone who stood near Magnus. Now, Sanguinius, he believed the same as Jagatai Khan. Jagatai Khan and Sanguinius were one of the same when it came to forming the Librarius, which was that the Librarians need to be made and they need to explore their psychic powers, but it has to be moderated. Has to be. Next, you have Conrad Kurz. Now, Conrad Kurz used psychic powers, even though it's said that he might actually have been not that psychic, but he did use it on his homeworld to make people feel like they were being hunted at all times, and use it to psychologically terrorize the enemy with just thoughts of death or doom coming on them. This, of course, would mean he's for it. He's all for that. Terrorizing people with just a thought? He loves that. Then you got Lorgar. Lorgar, of course, he believes that Psykers are gifted by his gods. Except for Khorne. Khorne hates Psykers, but obviously Tzeentch does stand for psychic power, so of course Lorgar supports Psykers. And after all, he uses Psykers to communicate with his gods, to summon their agents. So, of course, Lorgar is for Psykers. Then you got the last one, Magnus the Red. Oh boy. So not only does he believe that Psykers should be allowed, he believes that they should be allowed to just, well, pursue any knowledge regarding the arcane with no limitations. Now, his main strength, of course, when it came to battling, and his main strength when it came to him being born with his gene seed, was that he's a powerful Psyker. But his constant pursuit of knowledge freely like this does come at a cost with people's lives, as I said before. In order to do the sorcery, you have to sacrifice people. You have to make bargains with entities that are not human. So, yeah. This is why the Emperor, in the early days of the Crusade, when he met Magnus, he privileged him with some information that the Emperor didn't share with anybody else. Like what the demons are, what the Neverborn were known as. But Magnus, he argued that that's not enough. We need to explore further. We need to arm ourselves with more knowledge. So now that we talked about the Primarchs who are for it, let's talk about the Primarchs who are against it. First up, Mortarion. Now, I know it's weird because after the heresy, Mortarion's like this really powerful Nurgle psyker with all the Nurgle's rot and shit. But pre-heresy, Mortarion was actually highly against psykers due to his battles with them. Now, on his homeworld, he was ruled on Barbarous by a shit ton of sorcerers, where people were subjugated to horrors of poison, noxious clouds. Many of their children would die. They would suffer every day excruciating pains from their lungs being torn up. And also in the Great Crusade, with him, Jagatai Khan, and Horus all on one world where everyone was mindless husk being controlled by a council of psykers who, once they finally got to the psykers and fought them, the psykers mutate into these weird fleshy beasts that nearly killed all of them. This, of course, was saved the day by Jagatai Khan and his Storm Seers. But Mortarion is very hateful of psykers. He just views it as a downside thing. He's dealt with enough sorcerers to say, you know what, all of them are the same. They're all going to be quote-unquote good guys. But when they turn bad really fucking bad. Then you got Angron. Angron views it as dishonorable. But on the other hand, if you watch my other lore videos on the World Eaters, you would know that the Butcher Nails, which is inside Angron's head and his legion, they tend to twitch when near psykers. They tend to get a little electric, which causes them extreme pain. So, of course, Angron hates them. He still has some in his legion. He just doesn't like them. He doesn't let them go near the fucking battle zone, because last thing he wants is for that shit to start twitching. Now, here's the guy who's anti-psyker on the positions, but he's actually relatively neutral. This would be Corvus Corax. He's relatively neutral to psykers. He could go either way. But he did want Magnus censored. He wanted Magnus to pay for his crimes because, after all, Magnus openly sacrificed civilian lives just to cast meaningless rituals that, in the end of the day, he could have just stormed them with his legion and lost no Marines and took over the planet. But instead, he sacrificed a shit ton of people, which Corvus Corax, he may not be the nicest of people. He may not be a true humanitarian like Vulcan, but he still hates seeing people's lives thrown away. Then you have Leman Russ. Now, Leman Russ holds honor above everything. So, he viewed this as dishonorable. It's an underhand tactic, which, of course, the Alpha Legion love that. That's why they're a huge proponent for psyker use. But Leman Russ is a huge against it for the exact opposite reasons. He views it as just dishonorable. The only honorable way to kill an opponent is with a gun or with a sword, close combat. And he also viewed it with superstitious beliefs. Like, his rune priests were not using, well, psyker powers. They were using just powers that were given to them from the planet of Fenris. Whereas psykers were using this weird, forbidden, evil, underhanded tactic because they're cowards at heart. Also, Leman Russ has actually seen the Thousand Sons fight. And this, of course, did not settle well with him. He saw where Magnus and his legion formed a bunch of sorcerer circles, sacrificed a few people, and then boom, everybody's minds just got erased, and now they're being controlled by Magnus and his sorcerers. This doesn't settle well with Leman Russ. He views this as distasteful extremely. Now you have Lionel Johnson. Now, Lionel Johnson is much like Corvus Corax. He's relatively neutral. He doesn't care either way. In fact, when the Horus Heresy breaks out, he was the one who unleashed a shit ton of psykers, a shit ton of librarians onto the Chaos forces. But he did believe Magnus was going too far into the arcane and thinks that he needs censoring. After all, Lionel Johnson came from a world that was full of chaos creatures. He understands that the creatures of the warp are not friendly creatures. He doesn't know much about it. He doesn't know, how psyker magic works, but he does know that the inhabitants of the warp are very fucking deadly, And if they're actually able to reason with you and bargain, it's not for the better. So, of course, he wanted Magnus to suffer his crime, but out of brotherly love. Now, Perturabo and Ferrus Manus, they both hate Psykers for much the same reason as everyone else. It's dishonorable, superstition, and it's just a little too weird, and it should be punished if you break the word of the Emperor, like Magnus has. Which, again, leads us to the whole point of what the fuck Nykeya is. It's mostly Magnus standing on trial, and Magnus doesn't understand that. He's the last one to figure that one out, which I think is just absolutely funny as hell. Now, that's all the Primarchs that we've covered. As I said in the very beginning, there was 2 of them that were neutral, Rogodorn and Horus Lupercal, and they would pretty much stay neutral afterwards. Now, just looking at this, you can see that a lot of Chaos forces were actually for the use of Psyker powers, and not too many Loyalists were actually against it. They were just more against censoring Magnus for going too far. So this is a good image in my head to show you guys how this is really proceeding. So it's not like some great evil scheme to disarm the Loyalists of their Psykers. No, actually, the ones who would betray the Emperor are the ones who are saying, yeah, let's keep the Psykers. Let's keep them, yeah, even though that fucks us up in the future. So it shows again that even though the Horus Heresy is going to occur right after this, it wasn't necessarily planned. It wasn't necessarily like the Council of Nykeya was some sort of grand scheme to make it where the Loyalists were defenseless. Not really. You see a lot of traitors on the pro side, and very few traitors on the anti side. So it's again just something that I like to do with this visual. I just like to keep you guys to see visually the sides and the arguments that are being made. Alright, so now let's talk about the other people who were in the Council of Nykeya. The people who had some say and were able to somewhat influence the Emperor a little bit. So, starting with the pro side for others, we have Azek Ahriman, who believes that knowledge is power, so barring Psykers would bar them, the Imperium, from gaining any strength, as they couldn't learn new stuff. After all, the Mechanicus is doing a great job. There's not much more for them to learn. And really, they're really defenseless against the Arcane. They know so little about it. So why not learn more? Then you have Amon, the equerry to Magnus. Now, he's the same reasoning with Magnus and Ahriman, as that Psyker powers, he believes, can be used to predict futures, as he would constantly scry the future and look at possibilities. This, of course, was a good argument. Like, you could actually use this as an argument against the anti-Psykers, which is that, what would you rather have? Constantly fighting battles without seeing ahead what the outcome would be? Or use Psykers and just use a ritual strictly for predicting futures and weighing the outcome? Of course, his argument was rather weak because humans aren't like Eldar. They weren't able to get a good glimpse of the future. So, of course, they were wrong sometimes. Next up, we have Nasir Amit. He believed much like his Primarch, and he has fought alongside some Psykers to see them as, well, powerful allies. Next, we have Elicus, a Dark Angels librarian who viewed the Librarius program and Psykers in a very positive light. He wanted to see more of the Librarian program implemented. Now you have someone who's not a Space Marine or a Primarch. This is interesting. Mahavastu Kalamicus, the Remembrancer who viewed power not just as a military aid, but also viewed as a humanitarian aid, as after all, you could produce some great artworks and some great literature from using the psychic powers. In many of his writings and such, he viewed the future and saw the danger of Prospero. This is what his main argument was that the psychic powers were more of a benefit rather than a downside. Next, we have Promus, who is a ultramarine librarian. He's much like Gilman, is that he voted for the use, but, well, he was actually vocal about it. Gilman was not. Gilman was not that vocal. Next, we have Raldoron, a Blood Angels chapter master, who actually wanted more Psykers in use to aid the Imperium, but unlike Magnus, made damn sure that he would follow the Emperor no matter the sentence he pronounced, even if it was against Raldoron's position. Even if the Emperor said everyone who's for it should be put to execution, Raldoron was willing to say that he is willing to follow the Emperor verbatim. Whatever word he said, he would follow. Now, the biggest argument I would ever say would be Targetai Yasuge. Now, Targetai Yasuge was the one who went in place of Jagatai Khan, because Jagatai Khan wasn't able to be there. And Yasuge was a storm seer of the White Scars who brought up how working in the warp with entities inside can lead to corruption. And he strongly advocated his form of the Librarius, where they follow strict doctrines and they learn about how using too much of the magic can actually do bad things. But if you use enough of it, it's all benefits. And of course, the issue with him being there arguing for Jagatai is that Jagatai, he's more charismatic. Same with Magnus. Magnus was more charismatic. But the problem with Yasuge is that he barely spoke High Gothic. So many of the people had a hard time understanding his position, despite the fact that, after all is said and done, people use Yasuge's Librarius suggestion for the future after the Council of Nikaea. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to the other two guys. Umojin, a Librarian Salamander who supported the continued use of Psychers, and Zeros, a Night Lord Psyker who, like his Primarch, he really wanted to use more Psyker prowess. He saw it as a great thing, a way to really terrorize those who would break against the Imperial will. Now, let's go on to the anti. As you can see, most of the pros are just Librarians, because that's what was done. They put all the Librarians in one big group and just had them stand before the Emperor. So that's why most of them are Librarians. Next, we got the anti. Now, some of them are going to be very repetitious. Like On Hellwinter and Bjorn, both of them are the same. They just believe in their Primarch, which is as dishonorable combat, and it's morally just not that great. But next we have Othir Wordmaker. Now, he's interesting, because in the early days of the Great Crusade, he actually followed Azek Ahriman's teachings and tried to learn some of the secrets of sorcery, because he wanted to learn more about being a Psyker. But when Ahriman showed him the warp and showed him some of their sorcery, he just didn't settle well with it. And he remained relatively neutral till the day of the Council of Nikaea when he went to speak. And he spoke his mind. He spoke his morals and his beliefs, which totally backstabbed Ahriman by saying that sorcery and spikers were just too dangerous and that the power used was very alien and bad for the soul. And again, this is the Imperium of Man. Anything alien is bad. So saying that the Psychers is alien, that's really bad. Next we have Callus Typhon, a Death Guard. He sided with his Primarch, same like everyone. Now here we go with a non-Space Marine and Primarch, but this time anti. This would be Constanza Swati Falcon, Admiral of the Imperial Fleet, who's adamantly against Psychers, related to both their superstition and seeing as how, since they've commanded a fleet, this Admiral knows that without a Gellerfield, her ships would be just destroyed by the warp entities that exist. So for Magnus to sit there and say the warp entities can help us, yeah, Falcon's not falling for that. He's seen the warp entities. He knows without those Gellerfields, those warp entities that Magnus would call friends would rip them all to shreds. So using Psychers is obviously a very bad thing in their mind. Now, Kelbor Hall, the last one. Kelbor Hall is a Fabricator General of the Mechanicus. I haven't really talked about him on my channel yet. I probably will in the future. But he just didn't like Psychers, as most Mechanicus don't, as they weren't using powers of the machine god. Instead, they were using just weird powers that weren't mechanical in nature. So, of course, he didn't really like it. Now, despite how abundant the pro-Psyker side was, as we can see here, there's a lot of people for the Psyker use, but there's very little people who are anti-Psyker. Well, the reason why it is the way it is because most of the people on the pro-Psyker, around half of them couldn't attend the Council of Nikaea. Most of the Primarchs didn't go in. Only Magnus, only Sanguinius, they're really the only ones who really went. So Vulcan, Robert Gilman, even Jagatai, they couldn't really attend and vouch for Magnus's side. Which was really the next topic we're going to talk about, was what was the main purpose of the Council of Nikaea, which was that it wasn't meant to be even. Most of it was anti-Psychers. Magnus was outnumbered as far as positioning went. So, with Leman Russ and his entourage of anti-Psychers, they still weren't as charismatic enough to disprove Magnus the Red. But it was obvious right from the get-go, even Mortarion points it out, was that 70 years before the Council of Nykeia was even formed, Malcador the Sigilant told Mortarion that there's going to be a trial for Magnus, which would be the Council of Nykeia. So this obviously wasn't meant to be a fair trial. This was meant to be kind of like a ruse. This was meant to give the anti-psychers an illusion that they're being listened to by the Emperor, even though it's obvious in the future the Emperor kind of did have plans for future psyker use. Like, the Thousand Sons Legion is an all-psyker legion. Why the fuck would he make them if he didn't have plans for them? But at the same time, it served as a warning to Magnus, saying that, if you don't follow my creeds, there will be some serious consequences, which we're going to get into right now. So how did the council proceed? Well, both sides gave their story. You had Mortarion of the Death Guard recount the countless horrors he's dealt with, the countless planets that were ruined by sorcerers, and how the librarian program was starting to spiral from just simple psychers who were space marines, but slowly spiraling into just sorcerers, just like the worlds that suffered. And he was also talking about how he didn't hate Magnus. He didn't want to see him punished. He's just saying out of brotherly love that Magnus is starting to go down the same path that Mortarion himself has seen other sorcerers go down. This, of course, did not settle with Magnus. Then we got Leman Russ, who goes on his whole bigotry rant about how the powers of the warp should not be used at all, as it is just not honorable. The whole point of the Imperium is that they are the purity of man. To be a man is to attack someone head on, not to use some sleight of hand, some trick. But Magnus decided to rebuke. And Magnus, being who he was very, I should say, fanatical, very radical in his thinking compared to most of the Imperium. So he says that no knowledge is inherently evil. No knowledge is inherently corrupt, as long as the learner is a master of that, what they have learned. That basically means is that he has fucking guilty of studying the sorcery. But instead of staying there, he goes on deeper, saying that Mortarion does not have brotherly love for him. He just simply wishes to see him suffer and wishes to see him be punished. This, of course, did not go well with Mortarion or Leman Russ, that he is now attacking them when they both were just simply stating that they were concerned for their brother. And he is saying, no, you are not concerned. You guys just want to humiliate me and punish me for being different. This, of course, does not settle well with some people. But Magnus does have a point, which is that no knowledge is necessarily evil. You learning how to use a gun, for example. Building a gun isn't necessarily an evil thing. Yes, it takes a life, but it's not evil so long as you use it the way you designed it to be used. Now, this is kind of along the lines of what Magnus' speech was about, was that the Thousand Sons are masters of what they have learned, just like the Ultramarines are masters of what they learned. The Alpha Legion is masters of what they learned. The White Scars are masters of what they learned. The White Scars are masters of speed. The Ultramarines are masters of fertility. The Alpha Legion are masters of discretion and espionage. This is what Magnus was saying, was that, yes, sorcery is weird and it is dangerous to those who don't understand what they're learning. But his legion knows what they're learning, and as due to that fact, and in his train of thought, because that they are masters of this particular field, there is no supposed danger to them dwelling in sorcery. Now this again is awful, 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 because he is now admitting to the fucking crime that he is being accused of, which is sorcery. But it's even worse, is that he is now over-charming the other side, so now the anti-psychers are kind of confused as to how they should proceed now. Because yes, he makes a point, but he's totally ignoring the danger of what it is he is advocating. And that's the main issue that Magnus had. And there was some other interesting proceedings. So, while Othir Wordmaker And as the Airymen had their little scuffle with each other about how one betrayed the other and how Wordmaker is a psyker, yet he just betrayed him. Well, there was also something else going on behind the scenes. Erebus went in place of Lorgar, and the reason for Erebus being there was not to say a speech about how much he loves psychers. No. Instead, he decided to impersonate Amon, the equerry of Magnus, and summon a demon that would overtly try to use one of the Space Wolves, who is more or less a hidden agent for the Thousand Sons. But the Space Wolves kind of suspicioned that this guy was an agent without him knowing. So they put Amon Tauromachy to defend him, who's a Custodes, and sure enough, the Custodes got attacked and almost knocked out by this entity, which they thought was Amon. So, yeah, this does not settle well with them. This is all happening behind the court scenes. So now not only are they accused of sorcery, but now they think that Magnus is overtly trying to subdue one of the other opponents on the other side, which is not looking good. Never do you want to be accused of tainting the other side. Now, Mortarion also goes on about how not only were Psychers bad and Sorcerers evil, but he also talks about how the Age of Strife, also known as the Old Night, where humanity almost got wiped out, that was mostly caused by, one, AIs, which is totally accurate, but also by the growing Psyker presence and the Sorcerers who would pretty much destroy their own worlds by being controlled by demons and by summoning demons, also by binding people to their will, eliminating their freedoms. This, of course, was something that Magnus could not refute. But Magnus was so passionate that he was right that he kept saying that, and I quote, "If I am guilty of anything, it is simple pursuit of knowledge." Yeah. This obviously caused more division rather than unity. And this is the issue, is that this had the result of causing a bigger divide in the council rather than a unified. Instead of people coming to an understanding, instead people started to become embroidered in their own position harder and harder. This was not good. So while the behind the scene thing happened where Amon Tauromachy had to fight off a quote unquote fake Amon, this, of course, didn't happen with the public's knowledge. So everyone who was in the council, especially the Thousand Sons, didn't know this was going on. And they didn't realize that the council was slowly turning against them. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Is that as a final protest before the Emperor, their position, all the librarians assembled in the middle. These would be Sergei's position, where he speeches on and on and on about how there's a third way this proceedings could go. Instead of banning Psychers or just allowing them to become sorcerers, how about there's a middle ground, which is the Librarius program, where he talks about how you can easily mix and match both sides, where, yes, there are strict doctrines and disciplines with little to no consequence. This way, both sides win. Well, little did they know that the Emperor already made up his mind pretty much before this began. But due to Magnus's arrogance and Magnus being full of himself and not seeing the issue of him dabbling in sorcery, this of course pissed off the Emperor, because the Emperor doesn't share information lightly. And the fact they shared with Magnus the Red a bunch of information, well, I'm going to read you the excerpts, a small excerpt of the whole speech. And I'm going to kind of stop mid-sentences to talk about who this is directed to, what I believe this means, and such like that. So, here we go. The Emperor says, and I quote, "I have walked paths no man can know and faced unnameable creatures of the warp. I understand all too well the secrets and dangers that lurk in its hidden darkness. Now, these two sentences alone illustrate that he knows more than what he told Magnus, and that Magnus is unknowledgeable of what it is he's fucking talking about. But he's also saying about how he's done things that no one else here has ever done. He's actually discussed with creatures of the warp, almost like sorcerers do. So it's kind of hinting that the Emperor is a sorcerer to some degree, which I think is very interesting. Alright, continuing. Such things are not for lesser minds to know, no matter how powerful or knowledgeable they believe themselves to be. This is again a target towards Magnus, saying that no matter how powerful you are, even if you're the Emperor himself, you are not equipped to know the warp. There's just not any way possible you can negotiate with the warp and win. To continue, the secrets I have shared serve as warnings, not enticement to further explore. This is totally geared towards Magnus. This is him definitely glaring at Magnus saying, you went way beyond what I told you to do. To continue, only death and damnation await those who pry too deeply into secrets not meant for mortals. This is again him illustrating that if Magnus keeps dwelling, he or the warp will kill him. He is illustrating again here the danger of the warp. So, with that, he pretty much says that librarians are no longer permitted. He destroys the librarius program, and pretty much every librarian goes back to being just a normal space marine. This is the results of the Council of Nykeya. Now, the issue is that no one fucking listened to it. And this is kind of the issue that we see, is that everyone agreed, okay, the Emperor's verdict was that, and the Emperor didn't censor Magnus. He just wanted it to be a unifying thing, because the whole point of the Council of Nykeya was that the Emperor's about to sit on Terra without any connection with his sons for a few years, maybe centuries. So, since he sees that this was a growing problem to the Imperium, he tried to unify them by making some sort of agreement, but also by putting Magnus on trial because so many people advocated it. Well, the Emperor himself, he saw that this was not going to happen. The people were going to be divided no matter what. But due to Magnus being so flamboyant in his position and directly pissing off the Emperor and going against his wishes, he saw it better to side with those who were more fanatical, those who were more easily tempered, like Leman Russ, to at least cull their bloodthirst and their rage on the issue by temporarily siding with them. But I don't think the Emperor had any plans to keep this the way it was. As we see, the Grey Knights, which are the Emperor's own vision of Space Marines, are psychers, every single one of them. So I don't think that this was meant to be a permanent solution. This was just meant to be a temporary thing till the Imperium fully understood the warp. It's much like the way they deal with the Eldar. During the 30K, during pre-heresy, they were powerful, but they weren't that powerful to destroy the Eldar without suffering significant casualties. So they decided to put them on a waiting list. When the Imperium reaches a certain level, then they'll deal with it. This is where I think the Emperor was putting the warp. He was going to say, we'll dabble in sorcery once we know what it is and once we're capable of dealing with it. Now, the only thing that the Edict of Nikaea really did was it allowed navigators and stuff like that to do their job. They're allowed to be the sorcerers that they're supposed to be because the astropaths and stuff are needed for space travel. But if you're going to be a librarian or you're just a low-level psyker who isn't eligible to be a navigator, you are not allowed to dabble in any sorcery. Especially what really, I think, cemented the anti-psyker view is when the witch hunters, known as the Sisters of Silence, started reviewing every single planet they'd been to that was ruined or under rulership of sorcerers. So this is what the Nikaea Treaty was supposed to be, was no more psychers at all. Now, did this take effect? Not really. Directly afterwards, Magnus ignored this, viewing them all as ignorant buffoons and viewing this as a dumbass decision. And then you got a few others who, like Lionel Johnson, he didn't really care for psychers that much, but he did know that they were fucking needed if he was going to deal with demons, because killing them with swords and guns is not enough sometimes. This is why during the Horus Heresy you see that the Dark Angels whipped out a shit ton. Also, you got Jagatai Khan, who already was kind of disregarding the Imperium and their laws, so he would disregard this as well. So this is kind of the stance of the Council of Nykeya. Besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I'm out. I hope you guys enjoyed the Council of Nykeya. I hope I covered everything. If I missed something, just let me know down below. And if you guys want to see something else explored, let me know in the comments down below. Besides that, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell icon so that way you get notified when I upload videos. And like, comment, subscribe as always. See you guys next time.